Michael Jordan is the richest athlete in sports history, with a net worth of over $2.5 billion. He sits alongside Tiger Woods and LeBron James as the only athletes to break the billion-dollar mark. These three generational talents dwarf all other athletes when it comes to business, and the six-time NBA champion is in a league of his own. But despite his achievements on the court, that's not where Michael Jordan made his money. Only 4% of his current net worth came from playing basketball, and the remaining $2.4 billion has been accumulated over a number of decades through lucrative business deals away from the court. This is the story of how Michael Jordan became the richest athlete of all time. Michael Jordan first emerged on the NBA scene in the 1980s, following a successful college basketball career that included a national championship at UNC in 1982 and being named National Player of the Year in 1984. He was then drafted third overall in the 1984 NBA draft by the Chicago Bulls, and the rest, as they say, is history. Over the next 2 decades, Michael Jordan became a 14-time NBA All-Star and was named the NBA's most valuable player on 5 separate occasions. He went 6 for 6 in the NBA Finals, making him a 6-time NBA championship winner, and he became one of the greatest players of all time, otherwise known as the GOAT. But despite all of these accolades, Jordan was comparatively underpaid. For 13 of the 15 seasons he was in the NBA, Michael Jordan made between $500,000 and $4 million annually, with the 2 outliers being when the Chicago Bulls were able to exploit a loophole in the NBA salary cap rules. Clearly, $93.7 million is a lot of money, but there are now over 150 NBA players who have made more than that during their NBA careers. That means 150 players have made more than one of the greatest players of all time. Obviously, salary inflation plays a part in some of this, but even Jordan's teammates were earning more than him at the time. For example, Scottie Pippen, MJ's teammate on the Chicago Bulls throughout the 1980s, played 2 fewer seasons than Jordan, but made $16 million more than him throughout his entire NBA career. This raises a couple of questions. First, how could the greatest player of all time be valued so low compared to some of his peers? But more importantly, how did the $93 million he earned on the court become $2.5 billion in less than 2 decades off the court? The answer to that first question is a mystery, but the answer to the second question lies mainly in 2 business deals. With an NBA career beginning in 1984, Jordan had to decide which shoe brand to sign with. At the time, he had 3 main options: Converse, Adidas, and Nike. Throughout college, he'd worn Converse, but this was mainly driven by his coach Dean Smith, who was being paid $10,000 each year to get UNC players to wear Converse shoes. In reality, Jordan loved Adidas. They were the only brand he really wanted to wear.
At the time that everybody was starting recruiting me about what shoes to wear, I was pro Adidas, the whole time.
But the problem was that Adidas didn't want him. The company was going through a tough time, following the deaths of founder Adi Dassler in 1978, and then his co-founder and widow, Kathy Dassler, in 1984. Plus, Adidas believed Jordan was too short at 6'6" to build the brand image they wanted, according to a Wall Street Journal story. So Adidas was off the table. The next option was Converse. Converse dominated the basketball conversation at the time and centered its pitch around its existing roster that included Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. They offered to treat Jordan just like all of their other athletes too, with a deal worth $100,000 per year. But Jordan wasn't content with being treated just like everyone else, so he turned them down. With Adidas and Converse out of the picture, Jordan's agent David Falk told him the only other option they had was with an upstart company called Nike. Nike had just reported its first ever quarterly loss, and their stock price had fallen 78% in just 2 years. So they saw Jordan as a lifeline for the company, and Jordan reluctantly traveled to Oregon to meet with their representatives. Nike ended up offering him a 5-year contract worth $500,000 per year, roughly equivalent to his NBA contract at the time, and they even threw in stock options, making the deal worth nearly $7 million in total. To put this into perspective, he was being offered more than any other NBA player was making at the time from their shoe deal, and he had never even played in an NBA game. It was a huge gamble from Nike. But soon, they would realize there was no reason to worry. Nike estimated that Michael Jordan's first shoe, the Air Jordan 1, would generate $3 million in sales over its first 3 years of production. But their prediction was far off, because the Air Jordan 1 ended up doing over $125 million in sales in Jordan's rookie year alone. And since then, Nike has paid Michael Jordan an astonishing $1.5 billion, making the partnership the most lucrative athlete endorsement in the history of sports. And with Michael Jordan now also receiving roughly 5% royalties on all Jordan brand sales, that means in 2022, when the Jordan brand made $5.1 billion in revenue, Michael Jordan took home somewhere around $200 million in royalties. So in 1 year, 2 decades after retiring, he made $100 million more than he made throughout his entire 15-year career in the NBA. Plus, it's 6 to 10 times more than current superstars like LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Stephen Curry earned from their signature shoe deals. And the Jordan brand is only getting stronger. The expansion of the Jordan brand into clothing, sponsorship deals, and other sports like golf means that Michael Jordan's income has gone from an average annual income of $40 million between the year 2000 and 2010 to roughly $200 million today. So even though he hasn't played in decades, he's still the highest paid basketball player every year. Those numbers are obviously absurd, but Jordan used this money to help fund his second best investment, buying a controlling stake in an NBA franchise. After holding a minority stake for 4 years, Michael Jordan paid Bob Johnson $180 million in 2010 to assume a 97% majority ownership stake in the Charlotte Bobcats. The deal made him the first ex-NBA player to become a majority owner in the league. Yet on the surface, it seemed like a strange move. At the time, the team wasn't profitable, they'd been losing money, and they weren't exactly performing on the court. But over the next decade, NBA franchise valuations exploded, and no team was left behind. This explosion in franchise valuations was driven by a number of factors. In 2011, the Collective Bargaining Agreement, or CBA, meant that NBA players' revenue share decreased from 57% to 50%. In 2014, Steve Ballmer purchased the Los Angeles Clippers for $2 billion, 3 times more than the previous record sale for an NBA team, leading to what became known as the Ballmer bump. But most notably, NBA TV revenue tripled after the league signed a 9-year, $24 billion contract with ESPN and TNT in 2014. This rising tide meant that the Bobcats, or the Hornets as they became known in 2014, increased in value from $278 million in 2010 to $1.575 billion in 2021, despite being one of the worst teams in the NBA over that decade. Even though he sold a 20% minority stake in 2020, Michael Jordan still has majority control over the franchise, and the explosion in team valuation means that his initial investment of $180 million is up nearly 10 times what it was when he invested in 2010. And franchise valuations probably haven't even hit their ceiling yet. If you look at cable broadcast ratings last year, 95 of the top 100 viewed broadcasts were live sporting events. So as more streaming services emerge, competition for these lucrative events will increase too, driving the price for media rights higher and higher. Add in the emergence and expansion of the sports betting industry, which hasn't even really penetrated the American market yet, and it's obvious that NBA franchise valuations could go much, much higher. But these aren't Michael Jordan's only investments. He's got equity in technology companies, his own esports team, his own tequila brand, various interests in the auto industry, and even owns a small minority stake in the Miami Marlins. Plus, he was even recently named a special advisor to the DraftKings board of directors. But even with all of these other interests also, the partnership with Nike and the Charlotte Hornets are still the primary drivers of Jordan's net worth. It's these 2 deals alone which have driven more than 80% of his wealth generation since he retired, enabling him to turn $94 million in NBA salary into a $2.5 billion net worth today. With the expansion of the Jordan brand and the expected continued growth in franchise valuations, Michael Jordan's position as the wealthiest man in sports history looks set to continue, and it proved he's the GOAT, both on and off the court.